Tell Us About Yourself is sponsored by bonusround.ca, streaming Canada's classic game shows on demand. Dive into the golden age of television with thousands of episodes of Canadian series that defined an era from anywhere in the world, all for just $1.99 a month. From iconic shows like Let's Make a Deal and Definition to cult classics like Bumper Stumpers and The Mad Dash, bonusround.ca brings you timeless entertainment that's fun, enlightening, and affordable. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, relive the magic of Canadian television history. Subscribe now at bonusround.ca for $1.99 and turn every night into game show night. By Game Show Forensics. Join host Robert McKee and his crack team of forensic game show scientists as they take you on the deepest dives imaginable in a quest to analyze the most detailed minutia of game shows nobody else dares to, or cares to, investigate. Nothing is too whimsical for examination, no semantics too absurd for the research extremists at GameShowForensics.com. Parental discretion is advised. And by The Inn at Leola Village. Nestled in the heart of picturesque Pennsylvania, the Inn at Leola Village is a sanctuary of luxury and relaxation. Indulge in the timeless beauty of their historic suites, each meticulously designed to transport you to a bygone era of elegance and grace. Experience the culinary delights of their award-winning Italian restaurant, where every dish is a masterpiece crafted from the finest local ingredients. From romantic getaways to corporate retreats, the Inn at Leola Village offers a haven for every occasion. Unwind at the spa, stroll through the lush gardens, and let the stress of everyday life melt away. Make your reservation today at theinnatleolavillage.com or call the front desk at area code 717-656-7002. The Inn at Leola Village, an oasis of luxury. Tell Us About Yourself. Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States, and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700.
Blue 35.
Tell us about yourself, would you?
Tell us something about you.
For any new viewers, won't you tell us again about yourself?
We've met before, but let's meet again. Tell us about
What
yourself.
else can you tell us about yourself?
Perhaps you'd fill us in again and tell us about yourself.
I have to tell you, at this point, anything would be a guess, and I do not want to go down in history as the first person to miss the 1 million.
You mean you don't know your Gregorian calendar?
Not enough that I want to risk $1 million on it, and I'm going to stop.
Yeah. Well, it is a tough question, isn't it?
It is.
So you're going to walk.
I'm going to walk.
That's your final decision.
That is my final decision.
But just for the heck of it. Just for the heck of it. Yeah, why don't we see? Why don't we see if you could have won the $1 million, Tom? Just think about it for a minute. March 25th, July 1st, the old Gregorian calendar, September 25th, December 1st. When did you think the new year would start for them?
As I said, it would be a total guess, and it would be A.
A. And you're absolutely right. March 25th. Remember that if you ever get into another situation like this and they drag out the old Gregorian calendar question, it's March 25th. Hey, you won $500,000.
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Christian. The name is Tom O'Brien. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I am a freelance writer and culinary guy. I develop recipes and do things like that, culinarily related. First one was the local high school quiz bowl program. It's academic on the NBC outlet in Chicago, and that would have been 1973. And then the first season of the syndicated Jeopardy when it came back in 1984. And then Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in 2000.
So, Tom, I typically start these conversations by finding out what role game shows played in the contestant's life before they got to be contestants. So growing up, being a fan of this type of TV such as it was, what did game shows mean to you? Were they important to you? And how often did you watch?
Let me answer those in reverse order. As often as possible. Like so many kids, you know, when you were home from school during the summer or when you were homesick, it was pretty much continual game shows from, I was in Chicago, so 9 in the morning till noon, and then a break for lunch and some soap operas. And then they started up around 1:30 or 2 again in the afternoon. And as much as I could wrest the TV away from my mother, I would be watching as many as possible when I was home. So they were a big part of my childhood.
And I think about the game shows of the 60s and 70s, and there were so many different kinds of shows. There were quiz programs, there were puzzles, there was price guessing, tune naming. Was there a certain type of game show that appealed to you?
No, I was really a fanatic for all of them because it was kind of the golden age of, or at least the first golden age of the Goodson Todman shows. So you had What's My Line, which was the last thing you could watch before you had to go to bed Sunday night to get up for school on Monday. And then there were also the daytime GT shows like To Tell the Truth and Price is Right and Say When and Concentration and all of those. So I was really glued to all of those. There wasn't any particular type that really jumped out at me. If it was a game, I would pretty much watch it.
And was it the game or the show aspect of this type of TV that appealed to you? Were you a game player, or was there something about the visual presentation that hooked you?
No, I was really more of a game player because a lot of those early shows, particularly the panel shows, I mean, there wasn't a lot of glitz behind What's My Line or To Tell the Truth. They were just basically a sort of parlor game. So that's really kind of what I got hooked on. I mean, you had some that were more about the actual presentation itself, things like Concentration, but I think I was more of the game player type.
When I was growing up, being a fan of game shows, I didn't have too many people around me who not only were interested in game shows the way I was. I mean, nobody was interested in game shows the way I was. It was on a whole other level, even at a young age. But I also didn't have a whole lot of people that enjoyed playing the games themselves. I used to love the home versions of games, and I still have a bunch. And again, thinking about the 60s and 70s, I just finished talking with Matt Ottinger, and he has this, massive collection of board games. And we talked about that sort of golden age where you have all these plastic boards and red see-through windows and Milton Bradley bucks. And it seemed like any popular game show, there was an opportunity to play it at home in its sort of box game form. Did that speak to you? Were you a home game owner?
Oh my God, yes. I think when I was 6, I got the Milton Bradley Video Village game with the little red stand-up stores along, the last row, which they later repurposed about 4 years later for shenanigans. I thought it was kind of cheap. But I was big on those. I would have as many of those as I could get, like a concentration game. I mean, our family had concentration. Everybody had it back then because there would be a new edition that came out every year or so. And then I got the first version of the Jeopardy game when it came out. So yeah, I was a fiend for those.
Jeopardy with the little cricket clickers.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I used to love those things.
And as a kid, you would always put them too close to somebody else's ear and make them scream.
Oh, for sure. I never really used them for the game. I mean, I used to. I think that in the absence of worthy competitors, for that type of game, I think I used to just get the games and read the material, just read the questions and just kind of pour through all of it.
I'll tell you what the worst sound ever in a box game was, and I think Matt would even back me up on this. There was a Lloyd Jackson show called Everybody's Talking that featured video clips of people talking about a particular subject. And the home version of that had a squeaker, a little bulb squeaker that would it would take the paint off your walls. It would scare the cats and everything. It was the most obnoxious squeaker ever.
I think I know what you're talking about because Truth or Consequences, when it was on in the 80s, late 80s, there was a home version, and that also came with this little, it was supposed to mimic the buzzer on the show, but it was a very obnoxious, almost like a little dog, whatever you'd find in the center of a dog toy that would make the noise.
Right.
They just threw that in the box.
That's what this was, only on steroids. It was because you were supposed to place it. It had a little sort of box you would put it in the center of the table, and everybody would hit it when they thought they wanted to stop the subject, when they thought they knew what it was.
Video Village is a show and a game and a board game that comes up fairly often in these conversations that I have, and I feel like game show fans of a certain generation have enduring memories of Video Village, and it's a show that's pretty forgotten today, pretty obscure. I mean, pretty obscure. You don't hear about it, in retrospectives of that type of TV, but it was, so the home version was a board game based on a game show that was also a board game.
Right.
And it was like a fantasy world. I mean, looking back on it now, you realize kind of what the show is made of, but for its time, I imagine it must have been so enthralling to watch something like Video Village that was presented as its own sort of separate world.
Well, right. And the time when I was a kid was just post the big scandals. I have a vague, very vague memory of some of the early shows like Dotto, but not enough where I could hang anything on. And Video Village was one of those shows where they designed it so that nobody could rig it. I mean, it was low prize money overall. I mean, $15, $20 on a step, and you roll the dice in the chuck-a-luck cage. So it was pretty unriggable, but yeah, it was like going into your own little world. And then they did the kids version as well, occasionally on Saturday mornings, which made it even cooler.
Right. And then there was Shenanigans, which was not necessarily the same show, the same sort of core concept. Stubby K was the host, if I'm not mistaken, and it was the same sort of thing. It was like Saturday morning. It was fun for kids, not necessarily a massive board game like Video Village was, but yeah, it was along the same lines.
Peter Quigley just took the same concept and just sort of rejiggered the board and made it a little more kid friendly. But that was another board game I had because it was the same sort of thing. It was just a kind of different version of Video Village, and it had a few more interactive things in Video Village did. Like one of the things you had to pop a little tiddlywink through an eye, I think it was. So it
Yeah,
was
the
a little
little
more
stunts
interactive.
and mini games. Right.
Exactly.
Meryl Heater and Bob Quigley are masters, or were masters, of taking a tiny toy and making it larger than life for TV. And I think I'm of the personal opinion that things like Double Dare and Legends of the Hidden Temple and all the Finders Keepers, all these kids shows from the 80s that had these massive kind of larger than life sets, I don't think those happen without things like Video Village, without things like Hollywood Squares, without exploring that concept of, taking the normal size and making it, incomprehensibly large.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because on the whole, the Goodson Todman shows didn't go for any glitz like that. They were basically, four people sitting at a panel, or password 2 and 2, something like that. So yeah, I think Heater Quigley really did that and did it well.
When you were watching these shows at that age, did you want to be a game show host?
A host? I guess probably every kid did to some extent, but never to the point where I wanted to pursue it seriously, or get into something like that. I mean, there was the ham in all of us who always wanted to host something for your friends, but yeah, I think I was more of the on the player side than the host side.
Sure. I think that makes sense. I always wonder if the love of game shows and the dream of being on the game show as the host or the announcer, something more than just a contestant or audience member, I always wonder if those are sort of mutually exclusive. I think that, it was true for me. I grew up sort of idolizing these broadcasters, and a lot of them were, from reruns, but the ones that I used to watch, when I was watching game shows when I was younger, the more recent ones, Peter Tomarkin from Press Your Luck, that was the first person on a game show that I saw that I wanted to emulate. It was just something about just having so much fun day in, day out, and being this gregarious sort of ringleader. I wanted that in my real life. I wanted to exude that energy. And so I always wonder if the people who like this kind of stuff, to the degree that I like it, also had that ambition in mind.
Well, I get that side of it, but again, I think maybe it's a generational thing because I grew up with a host like Bill Cullen, John Charles Daly, Bud Collier, and none of them were kind of, and I love Tamarkin. I thought he did great on Press Your Luck, but he's more the kind of high energy type of guy. And, most of the classic Goodson Todman people weren't like that. They were just exceptional hosts who could keep. Tom Kennedy was another name that comes to mind.
Sure.
They were witty and they could keep the game going, but they were never like the over the top SNL parody of what a game show host is.
I've been thinking about that stereotype lately. And when I think of the stereotype of that sort of, big grin, handed out money, ha ha ha, kind of game show host, I think specifically of Wink Martindale. To me, he is that. And I think about the rest of the hosts from that era, and I don't know, maybe it's me, but I struggle to think of many other hosts that fit that mold. It seemed like Wink Martindale did such a good job of making it this sort of slick performance that, people picked up on it. It was easily sort of, it was easy to impersonate. It was easy to sort of assume that character and be kind of funny about it. But there were so many other hosts that weren't that to me. And I feel like this, I'm thinking about it, feels like a little bit of an injustice. There were so many different personalities. I think of people like Art James or like Tom Kennedy, who, in my mind, were not that. They were very personable and laid back in that way that only they could be sort of laid back.
Agreed. And see, to your point about Wink Martindale, to me, I would throw in Jim Lang and Bob Eubanks in that same category. Because to me, they were just sort of, I don't want to say unctuous, because they were really good at what they did and for the types of shows they had. but they were just, to me, more of these sort of anti-Goodson Todman type host, or anti-Art James, anti-Tom Kennedy. They were more the pepper-uppers, jumpy. And that goes back to, look at Art Linkletter shows in the 50s. He's so over the top sometimes that it's like almost unwatchable these days.
Right. Oh, I think of Truth or Consequences too. Ralph Edwards. If you look at an old Truth or Consequences, yeah, it's just so cartoonish is the word that comes to mind. It's just so out there, and like you said, so over the top.
There's a wonderful little movie from, I think, 1950 called Champagne for Caesar. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Art Linkletter basically, well, the whole gist of it is Ronald Colman is a genius who hates quiz shows, but since he's broke, he decides to go on one. And not only does he play for the money, he decides to keep going and play for the entire company. It's like $64,000 question on steroids. And Art Linkletter plays the unctuous host. And he's really good at playing this over-the-top character because it's what he did all the time.
Right. Well, I think of Richard Dawson too in The Running Man. I mean, that was, that game show stereotype kind of amped up to 11 with a little bit of that kind of dystopian thing thrown in there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I was more on the Art James. I'm glad you brought him up because I did some work with Ron Greenberg on the Anyone Can Play show that Stuart Shostak did on his internet channel.
Right.
And I got to talk to Ron about Art James. And he said Art James was a really nice guy. And that was like nice to hear.
Sure.
That not only was he competent, but he was a good person on the side. And I think he's all too forgotten these days.
Oh, for sure. And that's a style of broadcasting that, I mean, doesn't really exist anymore on TV.
You're right.
I think when Regis passed away, that was really the end of that type of professional host.
I think you're right.
And I think that sort of Art James type, I won't say conversationalist, but there was something about him that was just, he was inviting to talk to, and he would talk back, and he was just so smooth. Podcasting to a certain degree has room for that type of character. I feel like that's the only sort of media outlet these days where somebody like that can thrive. I mean, it doesn't translate well on TV anymore because TV is so fast and colorful and in and out, and it's just you'll suffocate being that type of performer.
Well, toward the end of Art's career, he had set up a company to do game shows for corporate events and things like that. And when I was in the advertising business, I tried so hard to get one of my clients to bite on that. Basically because I wanted to work with a guy. But that was how he sort of closed out his career.
Oh, way ahead of his time. I mean, you think about now, there are people who do these game shows at, conventions, and it all runs out of their backpack. It's a laptop and an HDMI cable, oh my God, it was like a tractor trailer. And I'll tell you how I know this. I have a friend named Josh Eldridge who pops up in and out in our sort of game show circle. He's probably listening right now. He was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I forget how much he won. I want to say, and he'll correct me, either 50,000, 64, something in that area, something in the low end of that top rung. And one of the first things he did was he bought Art James' traveling game show set.
Nice.
So one day,
that's great.
One day a tractor trailer pulled up and dropped off all this. I mean, it's steel girders, and it's vane displays, and it's all that sort of analog tech that,
right.
He owns it. It was like the episode of Seinfeld with the Merv Griffin show set. He just has that now.
That's a wonderful story, because I really did try to get one of my clients to bite on that, because I thought this would be perfect for your next sales meeting, and I couldn't get him to do it, because mainly I wanted to work with Art. Oh
my God, who wouldn't? That's incredible. What an incredible experience that would have been.
Yeah.
Tell me, and we'll get to your contestant stuff in a minute, but tell me about the first time you met somebody from a game show, whether it was a host or an announcer or a producer or somebody from that world? What was the first time you had an interaction with somebody from that
local
world?
or national?
Either one, because I think that both types of shows to people of a certain age, I mean, they're both that sort of, they both look like Hollywood. You don't have a concept of local and national, I think, when you're younger.
Sure. Well, the local show would have been, as I said, it's academic, the NBC outlets high school quiz bowl, and met the producers and the host there, and that would have been 73. So that was really the first time. We came up in a school bus to the Merchandise Mart, which is where NBC was headquartered at the time, and you got to go backstage, and they put on a little makeup, and the host came back and talked to you, and it all seemed very glamorous and exciting for a high school senior.
And how did
that would have been the first time.
Sure. How did that opportunity to appear on It's Academic materialize for you? How'd you get to do that?
Oh, they would, well, in the Chicago area, like every year, every high school would appear on it at least once, and they had the tryouts at our high school, and a friend of mine and I went because we thought, oh, this will be a fun thing to do after school one day. And come to find out, I wound up being the captain of the team, and my friend wound up being one of the alternates. So yeah, it was just kind of a let's get in there and give it a try and see how we can do and give it a shot.
And were you somebody who considered themselves good at trivia back then?
Well, I think that was probably the first time I kind of realized that I was. You know what I mean? Because
Sure.
it became a chance to try to soak up as much knowledge as you could in a short period of time before you were on the air. And I think that's when I realized, yeah, I've got a knack for picking up this information.
It's funny. Trivia in that way. I've talked to a lot of, in the course of this podcast, professional quizzers, professional, trivia players. Maybe not professional, but, they're in the circuit. They're playing on online trivia leagues. They're ranked. They compete. And trivia for me was always, and I wonder if you have this in common, Tom, trivia for me was always a thing where I don't realize how much I've learned until the moment comes to show it off. Like, I took the Jeopardy test maybe 10 years ago, and I was 19, 20 years old, something like that. And I didn't know nearly as much as I do now, but it always surprises me how much I know when those moments come up, if that makes sense. It's the kind of thing you don't get to practice a whole lot,
It totally, you sometimes wonder, what dark little recess of my brain did I pull that factoid out of? It's
right.
Like, how did I know that? Where did that come from? How did that embed itself into my head? And sometimes you're just amazed at how those things come out or how they don't come out when you need them to.
Oh, sure. Speaking of which, how did you do on It's Academic?
Oh, my God. There were 3 of us on the team, and there were 5 areas we had to cover. And I think it was English, history, general knowledge, math, and science. So there were 3 of us. One guy covered history, or one guy covered math, one guy covered science, and I had English, history, and general knowledge. And my 2 team companions got on stage and got absolute total stage fright.
Oh, no.
It was a nightmare. About halfway through the show, I'm throwing out answers in math and science, even though I don't know what they're doing, because these 2 guys are just sitting there frozen solid. We went down in flames. It was awful.
And I should really clarify for a second, just in case anyone isn't familiar with It's Academic. It's sort of a quiz bowl format, right? It's teams of 3 kind of against each other, buzzer battle sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Where, the GE College Bowl was 2 teams of 4 against each other. This was 3 teams of 3 from local high schools competing against each other.
Who was the host of your version of It's Academic?
A staff announcer at WMAQ named Ed Grennan. Great guy, really nice fellow.
I'm familiar with the name only because I subscribe to the Museum of Chicago Television, I think it is, on YouTube.
Oh yeah,
and they
the
post,
Museum of Broadcasting.
Oh God, they post the most incredible stuff.
I used to do volunteer work for them.
Oh, how wonderful! In what capacity?
Well, at that time, they were sort of in between buildings at that time. So they were really just sort of building up the catalogs. I would go in once a week and they would have basically news shows for me. So I had to go in and watch like the Sunday news shows, the Meet the Press, the Face the Nation, the Fox News Sunday, and catalog them, listen, write up the summaries of the topics and load them in the computer system. So that was really my main job there.
Any opportunity to get close to old TV footage is
you know it.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know it. And the head of the museum at that time was Bruce Dumont, which, if you know anything about TV, the name Dumont was the network, the fourth network in the 1950s. And he was the nephew of Alan B. Dumont, who ran the network.
Yeah, WABD, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that alone, it was like, tell me about your uncle,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like, for an old TV fan, how can you not want to do that?
Oh, that reminds me of a very quick story. I took a television production class, not television specifically, but video production class, I should say, in college. And my professor on the first day of class sort of introduced himself and talked about his history and said that he got his start working at Rockefeller Center in New York in like the mid-70s as a production assistant on different game shows. Now, he didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was, but he said that, and it just, everything went off in my brain. And I raised my hand in the middle of his little speech, and I said, could you tell me what game shows? And he kind of dismissed it. You won't know what it was. It's a long time ago, right? But, and I said, please try me. And he said, okay, well, it was a show called, Winning Streak. And I went, oh, with Bill Cullen. And it was, just unlocked all these memories. And I stayed after for like an hour. I said, tell me everything you remember about working with Bill Cullen. What a treat it was. That's the first person I'd ever met who had a direct connection to somebody from that era.
Sure.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story.
So tell me about, because you and I have this in common. I was on Millionaire in 2010, and I took the test like 7 times online. Well, no, the last time I took it online, took it 7 times in person, failed it every time. Finally passed the test, made it on the show. Did well enough. I won $15,000, but that was a show I had dreamed of getting on my entire life. What was the background of your quest to get on Millionaire? How did that play out for you?
Well, it was one of these things where I wasn't one of the early adopters, so to speak, of it. I didn't really catch on to it until it'd been on for a month or two. And then, like so many others, I watched it and I thought, yeah, I could do that. Which isn't that both like the best and the worst phrase about being a game show contestant, because you think you can do it until you get there. But that was a time when they had the telephone qualifying rounds where you had to answer basically 5 fastest finger type questions over the phone. They would have phone qualifying periods. Say the lines are open for tape dates of XYZ. And you had to go through and answer 5 fastest finger type questions on the phone. And if you got those correct, they would throw you into a pot of, I want to say, like 100,000 contestants to go through and do a second round of another 3 or another 5. And from the people who got all that right, they would take them into like a pool of 10 to qualify them, see if they qualified for the show. So I was doing that religiously. I was doing the phone game every night it was open, and just finally eventually got through, beat the odds,
right,
and got all the way through.
that was a magical time for that particular show, because the appeal of Millionaire early on, at least in my opinion, was the fact that anyone could get on the show if they were smart enough. That was the only criteria. And, there's a little bit of speed involved, hand-eye coordination, because you're, organizing answers on the phone for the test, but that's all it took. And so as a result, you have a show that sort of has the ethos of one of those local lottery shows where, it's everyday people. It's not people that went through this, casting filter. They're not, speaking to demographics. It's just whoever passed the test. And, it was the only show like that on TV. I mean, it's lost these days, that idea that everyday people on TV, it works. It works. It's engaging because they're relatable.
It truly was, because it really was, I think, the last show where people could sit there and identify with, John Doe or Jane Doe in the hot seat, because they're like, yeah, okay, I know that. I could do that. I'm as smart as he is. And and it had a great play along factor as well.
Oh, sure. Sure. And the fact that you can sit there for as long as you wanted while you thought about the question and whether you wanted to walk away, whether you wanted to use a lifeline. You're torn between two choices. Which one is it? There was no time limit.
No.
To me, that just contributed to the art of that show.
Well, we were on it too. My first show was the second half of a 2-day tape show. And on the first episode that day, there was a fellow who went for about a half an hour on one question. They edited it down, of course, but he called his father as a phone a friend, and they weren't sure the father heard the whole question, so they went and redid it. But the fellow thought for almost a half an hour, deliberated on the question. So they had to tighten that up a lot in editing. When you're sitting in the back waiting to go on, it's like brutal.
Because, excruciating! I can imagine.
Totally, because you feel for the guy and you want him to win and you want him to have a fair chance, but you're like, I want to get in there. So, yeah, they gave you all the time you needed, and they said that. So,
interesting test for a host, because and maybe you have some insight into this because you were present for one of these half-hour sort of deliberations. But I wonder what a host does to make that time go by.
Well, it's a little hard to say, because we were kind of in the back of the studio and really couldn't see the stage area that much. But I think Regis was just as calm and as collected as he could be about the whole situation. Never really pushed the guy to answer. Told him to take his time, would give him all the time you need. And the producers were very, very gracious about, making sure the guy's father had heard the question, etc. I have to hand it to him. He probably handled that situation better than I would have, because I would have told the guy, come on, give me an answer now.
You're right. Because there's that part of your brain that, knows there's a show going, but at the same time, I mean, the rules are the rules.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I would love to hear about your experience in the hot seat. It is a unique atmosphere as far as game shows are concerned. There are no other shows that operate the way that one does, where you are in the round and there's nothing but eyes on you.
Exactly.
I mean, that pressure.
It's so different from Jeopardy, where you're, there's three of you and it's a competition. And once you got into the hot seat, it was you and the questions. That's really what it was. It was you and that question screen in front of you. And it was very Coliseum-like. At least the original Millionaire studio was. And you had all these people sort of looking down on you. And they did things like the original Millionaire set. The floor was plexiglass, and underneath the plexiglass was these sort of jagged silvery things which would reflect up. And they did that so that you got the feeling you were walking on thin ice when you walked out.
Oh, beautiful.
So, yeah, so how's that for a little mental, uh,
Beautiful,
a
beautiful.
little psych out? You're walking into the hot seat and you're walking across this floor that looks like jagged ice coming at you. So,
It's just,
um,
it's incredible the detail that they had in mind when they created this show. I mean, I feel like they took the concept of like those big money shows from the 50s
yeah,
and they elevated it like to the point of opera. Like
it,
it was a show.
it was. Yeah, I mean, it was basically, let's face it, it was $64,000 question redux, just adding in lifelines. And
Sure.
that's what Michael Davies, the producer, always said. It's like, this game is about knowing how to play the lifelines. And that's really, but you're right. It was very, I mean, the dark blue set, the way they would turn off the lights when they got up to the higher questions. Um, yeah, it was all about creating that sort of operatic drama atmosphere.
Something that you were prepared for having watched the show, or did it take you by surprise?
I don't think you were ever prepared for it. I mean, you kind of knew because you had to go through the ring of fire first, and you sort of saw what the studio looked like and everything. But I mean, until you're sitting in that hot seat facing the ultra white teeth of Regis Philbin, 3 feet away from you, you're never really quite prepared for it, I think. And it hits you once you're there.
Oh yeah. I think of what hosts say when they talk about, the show being different when you're sitting at home on your couch answering
Mm-hmm.
the questions versus being there under the lights in front of Regis around the audience. I mean, it is night and day.
It is totally, and that's the one thing I was glad that I had the game show experience before, um, because I knew it's not going to be just like sitting at home. And that's, I think, not everybody who was necessarily made it to Millionaire had that same sort of background.
Now, I watched your appearance in preparation for our talk, but tell the folks at home how you did on Millionaire.
Um, I got to the last question, the $1 million question, and um, I had told myself that unless I knew it like the absolute back of my hand, like I knew my name, like I knew it 100% surety, I would walk. And the question came up, and I had about a 60% surety in my head, but that wasn't enough. So I stopped right there and walked with a 500,000.
I have the question in front of me here.
Yes.
Before the American colony switched to the Gregorian calendar, on what date did their new year start? And you had March 25th, July 1st, September 25th, or December 1st.
Yeah.
Thinking about that moment and thinking about whether you knew the question, you were 60% sure. Where did that information come from? Was it, again, just one of those pieces of information that was back in the recesses of your brain that sort of emerged, or?
Yeah, it was in the back of my head where when the question came up, it's like for some reason March came up. And when I saw the March answer, I'm like, that's probably it. But then again, that would have been like one of the most likely fake answers they could have put in. And I was in a really unusual position. Well, like the only contestant who actually had to come back on a second day for the $1 million question. So I had a whole evening to think about it and went out to dinner in New York with friends. And as we're sitting having steaks and martinis the size of your head, I said, okay, so what do I do tomorrow? Do I take a guess or do I just sort of go with it? And my friends started like jumping over the table, screaming at me, saying, you walk, you take the money. If you don't know it, if you're not absolutely 100% sure, you walk. And so when that question came up, I was kind of like, I knew what it could be, but I thought the longer I sit here, the more likely I am to guess. And I don't want to guess on the $1 million question. So I just said, I did really fast. I just said, I'm going to cut my losses here and I'm going to walk with a 500,000. So
And I think that's a good idea for anyone listening, any potential contestants. If you don't know it, take that sure thing. Don't be a hero.
I mean, the thing about Millionaire is if you missed, first of all, I would have been the first person to miss the million. I did not want to be that. But
Sure.
if you missed at that level, you dropped to 32. And the difference between 32,000 and 500,000 is astronomical. I mean, 32,000 is a nice car, or well, at that time it was a nice car, or it was a couple of nice vacations, or it was a good down payment on a home, etc. $500,000 really changes your life a lot. So it's like I get very risk averse at risking $468,000. So yeah, so I was happy to walk with that.
Now, having that time between episode 1 and episode 2 to sort of ruminate, have a steak, get some sleep, think about it. From your point of view, thankful for that extra bit of time?
Oh, my God, totally. Totally. Because I think if I had done a straight run all the way through, I mean, I might have guessed on the March answer and gotten it correct and got the million, or something else could have popped in my mind and I guessed wrong. The probability that I would have taken a guess on the $1 million, I think, was higher if I had had a complete straight through run. Yeah. So to this day, I'm thankful for having that overnight break in between tapings. Because it really got me.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think there are tools. I think that there are, excuse me one second. I think that there are two schools of thought on that. I think that there are people like you, and I would agree with you that I would be grateful for that little bit of time in between. I think that there are still other people who might take the opportunity to overthink it and get into that next episode having whatever anxiety-fueled thoughts they had in the interim, and they might consider there to be a benefit in playing it all the way through.
I see that, and it could be totally valid for those people. For me, it was just really helpful to have that space and not have to go right. I mean, it was nerve-wracking when the end of episode bell rang and I just hit the $500,000 question. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, I've got to go through this again tomorrow just for this. But in perspective, it was great to have that time in between the two shows.
You mentioned just now that if you had played the game from beginning to end in one sort of fell swoop, you might have been more likely to guess at that $1 million question. What would you owe that inclination to? Is it the energy of being in that room? Is it getting swept up in the show?
Yes, it's a momentum. It's a momentum because you have the audience who is like screaming for you. I mean, and you just feel it. You're swept up in it. There's no way you can't be, because every time you get an answer right, they're getting more and more excited. And as you climb up the money tree, you're getting to 125, 250,000. They're getting louder and they're getting more excited. So, you're totally swept up in the momentum.
More of a personal curiosity, but when you left the show, did they give you your winning check or did they give you all of the prop checks that they set up for you?
They did not give all of the prop checks, but they let you keep the $500,000 prop check. And I know that they had prop checks made for the other contestants with their names on them as well. And I know some of them took those prop checks, but I'm really happy with the 500,000 prop check, and I've got that puppy framed and on the wall. So that was all I needed.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, there are very few contestants who have ever seen $1 million question, so that is that is good company to be in.
Yeah, and it's always like every time I would watch it and see somebody get $1 million question, it's like, damn it, why didn't I get that one? Because I know what country Paddington Bear was from. That should have been my $1 million question, but not the kind of thing you can worry yourself about.
No, that's something that in the course of doing this show, and then just in the course of having experiences on various shows, it's very easy to wish you did better, wish you had answered this, wish you had studied more, and I have regrets about my appearance on Millionaire to a certain degree. I wish I had practiced a little bit more, but at the end of the day, like you said, you can't harp on that. Just getting on that show is like winning the lottery, especially back then with the phone game.
Sure. Did you have a methodology for how you trained?
I didn't, because I didn't have a lot of time to train. I got so I took the test in July of 2009, and I hadn't heard anything back. I had started college that year. In October, on a Monday, I got the call, and on Wednesday, I was sitting in the chair. So I had not a lot of time to prep at all. And on Tuesday, they called and said, we've decided that we're not doing Phone a Friend anymore. So we were like one of the first tapings where there was no Phone a Friend. The training I had at that point was really just what I had learned from Jeopardy and Millionaire up to that point. And, again, speaking to your point, Tom, getting caught up in the energy of the show, getting swept away by the glitz, by the the cameras and I had Meredith Vieira, right in front of me. And, it's very easy to get caught up in that. And I think I did to a certain degree. Again, I don't have massive regrets, but of course I wish I'd won more. I think that's natural.
Well, my situation was a little different because I would have to go back and look at what the exact tape date was, but I had a couple weeks between the qualification date and the tape date, and I would sit on my lunch hours at the ad agency where I work, and I just like run through Trivial Pursuit cards, because it was a real easy way to just get a lot of information in your head. Whether or not any of that actually paid off, I can't say, but it just helped you feel a little more sure about certain things.
Oh, sure. I think there's even something to that process, whether the things that you study come up in your game or not. Just kind of flexing those muscles and getting ready, getting ready to reach back into those filing cabinets and pull out information,
right, is
super beneficial.
Yeah, I would agree. And a lot of it was facts that I've never used again, like, the 6 wives of Henry VIII in order. But it was just good to know that, okay, I had an inkling of what those were if it should ever come up.
This is unprecedented for this podcast, but we're working backwards. Let's talk about Jeopardy.
Okay.
Jeopardy was, you were on, it was episode number 122. You were in the second season. So the show is still sort of finding its feet. It's still in the shadow of the previous versions of Jeopardy hosted by R. Fleming. When you were on the show in 85, what was your relationship with Jeopardy? Did Jeopardy fit into your regimen as a game show fan back in the day?
Let me back up a minute, because I think it was a first season show, was it not?
Oh, was it? It might have been. I saw 85, and I thought that might have been season 2.
I think we taped in 84 and they aired it in 85.
Understood.
But yeah,
okay.
I grew up with the Art Fleming version, and that show was amazing. I mean, it was smart. It was tough, simple to play. Once you got the hang of the question angle of it, it was basically a simple Q&A game, with a few little angles like the Daily Doubles. But it was a game for smart people. So yeah, I was fixated on that. And for a while there was, I think, the NBC sort of morning hour of Jeopardy and Who, What, or Where game, which was another insanely smart show.
Yeah.
So those two were like they were like catnip for quiz fans. So
Sure.
yeah, but I would grow up. I had the Jeopardy board game and all of that. So big Art Fleming fan.
What did he bring to the show that Alex Trebek didn't? Not that Alex Trebek is a bad host by any stretch at all,
No.
but he's much different than Art Fleming. What did he bring to Jeopardy that
Art had a real gentlemanliness. I don't know if that's a word, but he had this thing when somebody missed a question, he would say, "Oh no, sorry," and you felt like he actually was. And
right.
I won't give you an opinion of Alex Trebek, but you did not get the same feeling from him.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think Art really did. Art wanted everybody to do well. That was the impression he put across on screen, and he was very gentlemanly. He didn't go over the top. He wasn't a jumper or a shouter. He would make little jokes about his producer that were terrible. They weren't jokes in sort of the John Charles Daly vein, but you just knew it was his personality, and you sort of rolled with it. And he brought a gentility to the show, which I think made people want to watch it because they knew it wasn't a dumb game.
Sure. I think I remember hearing it said about Art Fleming once that he was warm but authoritative. And that's sort of what that particular show required from a host.
You always got the feeling that, he was rooting for the players. He would say, "Now, come on, get out." If somebody was in the hole, we were minus 50. It's like, "Now, come on, let's go. You're on a roll. Let's go."
Sure. So, and he ran it so he had such variable speeds. I mean, from the little bit of Art Fleming Jeopardy that I've seen, because unfortunately there isn't a ton of it around these days.
Yeah, very few left.
It's rough. Yeah. But from what I've seen, he had this ability to sort of, host fast, host slow, depending on what was required, like in that moment. Which is something that I think differentiated it from the later version of the show. I mean, Art Fleming Jeopardy came across as much more competitive, I think. And I think that was because of the speed at which the game was run. I mean, when you had two people kind of, battling each other and,
yes.
Player one gets something right, player two gets something right. Yeah, and they're sort of going back and forth. You can tell that he's picking up on that sort of sense of competition.
When they got to that they would ring the 1 minute remaining bell. His speech pattern sped up, so he could get in as many questions as they could to make it more competitive and make it a better game.
Tell me about meeting and working with Alex Trebek. Tell me about how that was.
Let's see. First of all, I don't want to say anything that would in any way negate the amazing job that he did for 35, 40 years, whatever it was, of hosting that show.
Sure.
But on the episode I was on and on the show before, he was not a warm fellow. He was just not. He didn't like the way I wrote my name on the podium. I didn't do anything. I wrote, a big T and kind of a italic cursive OM. He didn't like that, came over and erased it and wrote it himself. And
really?
If you saw, I should send you a screenshot of it. If you saw what he did, it looks like a 4-year-old wrote my name. It's big and scrawly. D-O-M. But it wasn't just that. He was now. I feel maybe he was just having a bad day. He wasn't particularly warm to the contestants. He was rough on the staff.
In what way?
It was not the kind of day when you walk out having real warm fuzzies for the host. So
interesting.
And again, I'm not trying to negate any of the great stuff that he did for years and years and years. And I know it's one of those your mileage may vary situations. Other people had great times with him.
Sure, and we're in the beginning of the history of this particular version of the show where he is host, and I believe he's also executive producer.
Yes, he was.
He's juggling a lot, and I wonder if that presents a challenge to a host. I mean, is there a point where there's too much to worry about? You know,
I'm sure it was, because this was still early in the run, and those TV screens would break down sometimes. They did it on our episode. They did it on the episode before ours. And, you know, he was, I don't want to say he was yelling at the staff. He's like, come on, guys, let's get this. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to temper a little about the way he's interacting with the players. You know, he came over at the end of the show and told us how badly we did in the photography category. And it's like, wow, thanks, Alex. I've just had my life pass in front of me on national TV, and you're reminding me of this. Thanks. So,
right. Wow.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to affect your game. That's going to affect the way you play. And I can only imagine that it's hard to not have that frustration as a performer come across. I mean, you can watch a host and tell that, you know, certain hosts, you can tell they're having a bad day. They're having a rough contestant, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And his was, I think there had been problems with the episode before ours, because I think they said a normal taping took like 33 minutes. And the show before ours took nearly an hour. Ours was running long because of, you know, electronic breakdowns. So, you know, that obviously affected his mood a bit, I'm sure. So, and I'm sure it did not come through on TV at all, but you know, we kind of felt it in the studio. So
interesting. And tell me how that game went. You mentioned it's not on YouTube, and I read the outline of the game, but tell me how that went.
It was sort of a back and forth game. There were two of us going into Final Jeopardy who were, I think, $100 apart at the end, and we both risked almost all of it and gave the game to the third guy. So, yeah, so I came in second and won the lovely pressboard bedroom set. And yeah, it was a sort of a back and forth game. You know, the lead was going back and forth between two of us, and we got to Final Jeopardy, and we both missed it, and Leo, the third guy, won.
And tell me a little bit about how you prepared for that particular appearance. In 1984 or 85, how does a prospective quiz contestant practice?
Trivia books, quiz books. There were a few out at that time. There was one I remember that came actually from a group of prisoners who had set up their own quiz bowl system. You know, guys in prison who had done this, and the book was called Questions from the Rock Pile. And it was a great source for trivia. You would pick up things like movie trivia books, the almanac, just any sort of general reference thing you could get your hands on. Because, you didn't have an internet to go to and to download things. So it was like books. You just walk around with a stack of books and just try to read as much as you can. Have people quiz you, you know, hand them a movie trivia book and have them read you questions. Very low tech.
And there's a bit of hand-eye coordination in there as well. Mid-'80s, I mean, we're talking about the heyday of video games and electronics. And did any of that come into play in preparation for your game?
Not really, because working that the I don't want to say clicker, but working the button was really unlike anything else, as I remember. And this could be faulty memory, but I think it's true. You could buzz in at a certain point before the answer was completely read, and there was a system of lights on your podium that would sort of count down.
Right.
And when that light system went out, you could ring in. Well, you couldn't read the TV screen and look down at your podium at the same time. So I developed the sort of peripheral vision of watching the guy next to me. And when I saw his light go out, I would ring in. That became easier than trying to watch mine and the screen together.
Yeah, because I think at this point in the history of Alex Trebek's Jeopardy, we're still operating according to the old rules, which is as soon as the clue comes into view, you can ring in. So as soon as it comes on screen, you can hit your button.
Yeah, I do remember there being some sort of lighting system is on the podium for when you could ring in. I think they did have a couple second delay.
Okay.
This could be faulty memory because, again, it's 40 odd years ago. But I do remember there being some sort of countdown system that allowed you to ring in. You couldn't just ring in the second it showed up. That's my memory, and that could be wrong, but that's what I remember it.
Real quick, just before I forget, Tom, if you do have a screen grab of you at your podium with your name written, that would be super helpful.
Okay, let me see if I've got one.
If you have it at some point, that would be wonderful. We can use that because we tend to use photos of the contestants on shows like for the podcast art each week.
Sure,
and I think that would be cool.
I'll see if I can dig one up.
Sure, thank you so much. Tom, I've had the pleasure of talking to, at this point, dozens of contestants from throughout the history of game shows, and whether it's someone who lost on a $2 million question, someone who won on a $1 million question, someone who won a typewriter, someone who won a car, someone who lost a car. The commonality in all the experiences that I've, again, been fortunate enough to hear is that it's always fun to talk about. It's never a negative experience. There are, of course, outliers, but for the most part, getting on a game show is a fun story. Whether you win or lose, it's fun to recollect.
It is. And, I don't mean to sound at all like my time on Jeopardy was a day from hell. It was an amazing experience. It was great all the way around to go to Metro Media Square and see that big rack of monitors in front of you and hear the audience go, ooh, when you say, I'm going to bet 2,000 on the Daily Double and things like that. Yeah, it was a great experience.
Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants, is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Christian Carrion, from my studio in beautiful downtown Lancaster City, Pennsylvania. Co-executive producer Cory Anotado. Researcher Chuck Donegan. This has been a production of BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world, in partnership with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. For more information, visit museumofplay.org. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Christian Carrion. Good night. Tell Us About Yourself is sponsored by bonusround.ca, streaming Canada's classic game shows on demand. Dive into the golden age of television with thousands of episodes of Canadian series that defined an era from anywhere in the world, all for just $1.99 a month. From iconic shows like Let's Make a Deal and Definition to cult classics like Bumper Stumpers and The Mad Dash, bonusround.ca brings you timeless entertainment that's fun, enlightening, and affordable. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, relive the magic of Canadian television history. Subscribe now at bonusround.ca for $1.99 and turn every night into Game Show Night. By Game Show Forensics. Join host Robert McKee and his crack team of forensic game show scientists as they take you on the deepest dives imaginable in a quest to analyze the most detailed minutia of game shows nobody else dares to, or cares to, investigate. Nothing is too whimsical for examination, no semantics too absurd for the research extremists at GameShowForensics.com. Parental discretion is advised. And by The Inn at Leola Village. Nestled in the heart of picturesque Pennsylvania, the Inn at Leola Village is a sanctuary of luxury and relaxation. Indulge in the timeless beauty of their historic suites, each meticulously designed to transport you to a bygone era of elegance and grace. Experience the culinary delights of their award-winning Italian restaurant, where every dish is a masterpiece crafted from the finest local ingredients. From romantic getaways to corporate retreats, the Inn at Leola Village offers a haven for every occasion. Unwind at the spa, stroll through the lush gardens, and let the stress of everyday life melt away. Make your reservation today at theinnatleolavillage.com or call the front desk at area code 717-656-7002. The Inn at Leola Village, an oasis of luxury.